Tonight, sitting out the Russian election, get out of jail free cards from cops, and chipping away at bank regulations.
I'm not wearing camera-ready pants.
Police in Austin, Texas say 3 explosions contained in packages are linked. Today, a 75-year-old woman was badly injured and left in critical condition. Earlier this morning, a 17-year-old boy was killed, and a 40-year-old woman was injured by one of the devices. And 10 days ago, a package explosion killed a 39-year-old man. In all 3 instances, the packages were left on the doorsteps of city residents. None were believed to be delivered by the Postal Service. The first 2 were placed at the homes of African Americans. The 3rd victim was Hispanic. Police haven't ruled out the possibility of a hate crime. At least 49 people died and more than 20 were injured after a plane crashed at an airport in Kathmandu, Nepal. The passenger plane was coming in for a landing when it skidded off the runway into a field and caught fire. 71 people, including 4 crew members, were on board the flight that was arriving from Dhaka, Bangladesh. The cause of the crash is under investigation. British Prime Minister Theresa May says it's highly likely Russia is responsible for the poisoning of former double agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter. They're still in critical condition. May said they were poisoned by a type of military-grade nerve agent that Russia has developed.
Either this was a direct act by the Russian state against our country, or the Russian government lost control of its potentially catastrophically damaging nerve agent and allowed it to get into the hands of others.
Earlier today, Russian President Vladimir Putin said British authorities should first, quote, get to the bottom of things, then we'll discuss. A Vice News investigation shows what looks like the early stages of an ethnic cleansing campaign in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Conversations with more than 80 officials, activists, community leaders, and displaced people reveal evidence of targeted violence against the Hema community by the Lendu people. Victims told Vice News about raids by ethnic Lendu men armed with machetes, bows and arrows, axes, and in some cases, firearms. Some analysts say the attacks are similar to what happened during the brutal ethnic war between 1998 and 2003, but leaders of both communities dispute that and say that this time the fighting is politically motivated. The Republican members of the House Intelligence Committee issued a summary today of a soon-to-be-released report, announcing they hadn't found any evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, and that while Russia did interfere with the election, it didn't do so with the goal of helping Trump win. Representative Michael Conaway of Texas said the report would be given to Democrats tomorrow so they can comment on it. The committee's ranking Democrat, Representative Adam Schiff, said his Republican colleagues, quote, place the interests of protecting the president over protecting the country. Alexei Navalny ought to be one of the leading challengers to President Putin in Russia's elections this weekend. Instead, Navalny is barred from running. His political party remains uncertified, and Putin is polling at 70%. Since the only real question is how much Putin will win by, the Navalny camp is fighting for any leverage it can get.
The Alexei Navalny presidential campaign may not have a candidate, but it's still campaigning.
Доброе утро, друзья! В эфире программа «Кактус» на канале Навальный Лайв. В студии я, Руслан Шевединов.
Ruslan Shvedinov is a regular on Navalny's YouTube channel, which can reach hundreds of thousands of followers a week.
Напомню, самое важное, что сейчас происходит в нашей политике, забастовка избирателей, непризнание этих выборов, признание нелегитимными.
Now, he and the campaign's 400 employees are urging supporters to boycott Sunday's presidential election.
Can a boycott really have any actual impact on this election? I mean, Putin's going to win.
Конечно, с помощью бойкота мы можем придать нелегитимность этому режиму, чтобы Владимир Путин не смог говорить, что он всенародно избранный президент, что его любит абсолютное большинство.
You want to have some impact on Putin, even if it doesn't change the actual result.
Мы знаем, что для него это очень важно, и поэтому мы делаем все для того, чтобы испортить ему планы. испортим ему праздник.
It's not a totally symbolic gesture. The 2018 presidential campaign has been a subdued affair. With no meaningful competition, the election has hardly registered in the streets of Moscow. But the Kremlin does want a high turnout, at least 70% of the country. Supporters of the president have turned to booster parties like this one at a Moscow skating rink over the weekend to gin up enthusiasm.
Is the fact that it's a Putin thing, is that part of why you came or no?
Нет.
Не смотрите, что вы в шапках.
Мы пришли мы пришли и просто получили в подарок эти шапки. Ну и прикольно, почему бы нет?
Получить удовольствие.
I mean, are you supporters of Putin?
Кроме Путина, я так скажу, больше некого в нашей стране поддерживать. Это мое мнение.
Lev Gudkov is one of the last independent pollsters in Russia.
Люди просто понимают, что в нынешней ситуации Путин безальтернативная фигура. Ну, явка чрезвычайно важна. Усилия делаются для того, чтобы поднять ее до уровня 70%, что никогда не было. Как это сделать без фальсификации, это большая проблема. Но по нашим расчетам явка должна быть самой низкой за все президентские выборы.
Navalny party officials are also worried about inflated numbers. They're rolling out teams of volunteers to independently count the vote. At this Moscow field office, 1,500 volunteers have attended training sessions in the past month.
Он заносится в этот список избирателей. Так вот, первый фактор, который вы проверяете в отношении списка избирателей, это то, что он прошит. Исключена возможность того, что листочки из этого списка можно вынуть или засунуть.
Anton Lebedinsky is 33 and voted in every previous election. Now he sees the boycott as a small but meaningful way to register his discontent.
Естественно. Вот и поэтому мой вопрос, что является приоритетом, грубо говоря?
Ну вот лично для меня это то, что процедура выполнялась согласно законодательству. То есть.
So is there any point to even boycotting? Why bother?
If you consider the final result, probably no. We know the result. You guys in Stacy, you are so crazy that you don't know who your next president is, and we do. They call it stability, but it is quite on contrary. We don't have it. We're quite unsure about. I'm quite unsure about my future and future of my children. I feel that I should do something, and this is the best option I can see for myself at the moment.
On Sunday, China's legislature, the National People's Congress, voted to do away with presidential term limits. Of the roughly 3,000 delegates, only 2 opposed the amendment that extends the horizons of Xi Jinping's presidency indefinitely and incorporates his political doctrine into the Constitution. The near-unanimous agreement wasn't a shocker. Communist Party leadership had more or less decided on these changes in advance, and were just waiting on the delegates' rubber stamp. State media has trumpeted the party's view that getting rid of term limits will harmonize how the government runs, but it's a significant departure from the way politics in China has been done since the 1980s.
China has a whole raft of term limits in its politics, and most of them were brought in 1982 when Deng Xiaoping came into power. And the reason for that, it was a reaction to the dictatorship and often bloody and chaotic dictatorship of Chairman Mao Zedong. China decided it didn't want any more absolute dictators after that.
So why is the Communist Party going along with this? One reason is that Xi spent his entire first term consolidating power, including a huge effort to get rid of his rivals through an anti-corruption campaign.
He's got the Anti-Corruption Commission under his control. He's got the military under his control. He has the security services under his control. He has the Communist Party's personnel department under control. He has the Politburo under control. So there's no easy way to take him on. And I think, anybody who does want to do that really has to bide their time.
Another reason is simply self-interest. Many of the highest-ranking members in the Communist Party's Politburo are on the cusp of the unofficial retirement age, 68, and Xi, who's head of the party, already looks like he's going to blow past that. He hasn't named a successor, and that paves the way for him and his older cronies to stay on well into their 70s. In the short term, that's all fine and good for the people who are already in power. But in the long run, these shifts could cost the party dearly. They undercut the smooth transitions in leadership that everyone's come to rely on.
I think many Chinese government officials, much of the Chinese intelligentsia, are absolutely furious about this. They can understand and respect Xi Jinping's need to provide strong leadership, even authoritarian leadership. But I think they're very angry that he's taken such a retrograde step, because they believe that the term limits and the various other restrictions on politicians have helped to modernize the Chinese system and in fact have helped to stabilize it by allowing for orderly transfers of power.
And by taking away the predictability of that system, the Communist Party could be robbed of the things it values above all: order and control.
News broke over the weekend that President Trump told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that he would be ditching the Iran deal unless major changes are made by the deadline he set, 2 months from today. Almost everyone who's serious about foreign policy thinks that's a terrible idea, even if Iran's behavior is far from perfect. It's a vivid example of how political foreign policy has become, and what the fate of any North Korea deal might be. Someone in a good position to know all about that is Jake Sullivan. He helped negotiate the Iran deal, and he just started a new group called National Security Action to go after Trump on foreign policy. So if President Trump does come out of this meeting and he has clear commitments that North Korea will stop ballistic missile testings, etc., are you ready to give him credit for that?
First of all, I've already given the administration credit for enhancing this sanctions regime in a meaningful and material way that's having an impact on the North Korean economy. If we got a meaningful, sustained, verifiable halt to further progress in the North Korean testing program, that would be a very positive step. And I hope that that is what the administration is aiming for as one of the pieces of this diplomatic strategy.
A lot of Republicans would have agreed, at least, that halting Iran's nuclear program was a good objective. But then the Iran nuclear deal became a political football, regardless of what it had achieved. So isn't there the possibility for that to happen with this North Korea potential deal as well?
If Barack Obama had come out and said that he was meeting with Kim Jong-un, Republicans, almost to a person, would have criticized it as weak and feckless and giving some huge win away to the North Korean dictator. The fact that Donald Trump did it meant that Republicans, not to a person, but in a pretty broad way, said, oh, look at this. This is the result of good, tough-minded, clear-eyed American diplomacy. Iran is instructive, though, in an important way. The reason people criticize the Iran deal, in my view, is because Iran didn't come out with wholesale surrender. Didn't just say, we're giving everything up and we're asking nothing in return. That's not diplomacy. That's, as I said, that's surrender.
You're heading up a group of sort of Democratic national security professionals who hope to make that an issue in the midterms. So aren't you giving up the possibility of, talking about Trump's failures on North Korea by cautioning, let's not set the bar too high?
Well, absolutely not. I mean, first of all, the security of the United States itself should not be a partisan issue. My first obligation is to make the case for what is going to keep our country safe and keep us out of war. Number one. Number two, I believe that there is a target-rich environment when it comes to this president and the ways in which he is both making the U.S. less secure and less respected in the world.
The more that we're talking about this, the more politicized it comes. I mean, after 2018, 2020 starts right up. How much tougher does it become for President Trump to be successful on something like crafting a deal with North Korea?
Time is not your friend when it comes to these high-stakes diplomatic negotiations. Because the more time and the more attention that's placed on the negotiation, the more people focus on, both sides, on the concessions rather than the things you're getting. We recognize that in the Iran case. Part of the reason that the first several months of that negotiation were conducted in secret was to give the process time and space to be able to move forward without it being subject to all of those intense pressures. This is not that kind of circumstance. This is playing out in living color on the global stage. The team is going to have the discipline and the wherewithal to withstand that. And discipline is not a strong suit so far of this administration's diplomatic approach. So it will be interesting to see how this unfolds over 2018.
The Senate is on the verge of passing a bill that will weaken Dodd-Frank, the landmark 2010 banking reform law. The new bill will exempt mid-sized banks with less than $250 billion in assets from strict regulatory scrutiny and loosen some rules on small banks. It's a Republican bill, but it's also being supported by more than a dozen Democratic senators. Vice News spoke with former Congressman Barney Frank, the architect of Dodd-Frank, about what the new bill means.
I'm not wearing camera-ready pants. America's banking system is very different. We have a number of very large banks. People will be familiar with Bank of America, Citicorp, JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo. They have assets in the trillions of dollars. Then you have the kind of mid-sized banks. And then you have the community banks, the smaller banks. They like to be called community banks. That sounds very nice for them. And those are banks under $10 billion in assets. There's a very important reason for regulating different sized banks differently.
This has truly been a manic Monday on Wall Street.
The stock market suffered one of its worst days in years Monday. Investors reacted to a stunning reshaping of the landscape of Wall Street.
What happened in 2008 was a couple of institutions failed, whose failure went beyond hurting the people they were doing business with to the whole economy. That's the reason for regulating the big ones so strictly. So we've had three categories. Under 10 billion, clear cut. The largest ones in the trillions. Then you have the mid-range, and there's debate about where you should stop being just a mid-range bank and then move into a systemically important category for banks who, if they fail and can't pay their debts, could threaten the economy beyond just the people who they owe the money to. In our bill, we said above $50 billion, you would get put into the systemically important category. The controversy about the current bill is they went to $250. As to the Democrats who voted for it, I don't want them losing in 2018 because the community bankers were trying to get them defeated. People think of the big banks, JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, as the most politically influential. They're not. The community banks have the most influence because every single member of Congress has community banks in his or her district.
If you're a product of rural America like I am, you know full well the consequences when a bank leaves town. It is just a matter of time before that community shrivels up.
I am glad to give those Democratic senators the chance to satisfy the independent bankers without a cost to the whole bill. The Senate bill makes a couple of changes I don't like, but 95% of the Dodd-Frank Act is unchanged. For all of the complaints about the bill when we passed it in 2010, and for all of Donald Trump's ranting about it, the fact that this bill is passing and making fairly small changes in the overall bill is evidence of how well it's worked.
Last month, New York's police officers union reportedly slashed the number of courtesy cards cops get. These so-called get-out-of-jail-free cards sound like an urban myth, but they're real. Basically a fringe benefit for cops. Are they really a free pass for bad behavior?
So police courtesy cards are oftentimes given out by police officers to family members and friends. And the idea is that it's a signal to any police officer that may pull over this individual at some point in the future, that they might consider extending some courtesy. I am from Levittown, New York. My uncle, who is a police officer, hands them out every year on Christmas. The Christmas after my 17th birthday, he took out a big stack and he just started handing them out to people with their names written on the back. It said his name and then my name and then please extend all courtesies. The only time I've actually used the card was when I was driving in Manhattan for a job and I was on Canal Street and I made an illegal left. Immediately I got pulled over by an undercover cop car. I always keep my PBA card directly behind my license and I just hand it over to him. It's like one unit. He looks at the back and sees that my uncle is a Nassau County police officer, and so he called him and said, hey, I'm not going to give him a ticket, I'm going to let him off this time. He handed me back my license, handed me back my PBA card, and I put him in my wallet and I drove away and parked the car.
I did 13 years in the New York City Police Department. I can tell you now from inside experience, they don't have a clue as to how many cards are printed because they're not serialized. They don't inventory the cards. They just give them out. This goes all the way up the ranks, all the way to the police commissioner's office, where he may not give out union cards, for example, but they give out parking plaques. So it's almost the same principle. I've never given them out because you never know what people do outside of your presence, and I never wanted my name to be affiliated with anything remotely close to improper conduct. So I never gave mine out.
That's Vice News Tonight for Monday, March 12th.